Greetings and welcome back to Asafo Academic. We got another debunked video on the chopping block. I got Matt Walsh and Bill Maher. This will be a 2-for-1. Bada bing, bada boom. See, I started off with Tucker Carlson, so I give it to the black conservatives, but I'll spin the block, get at the main conservatives. See, when it comes to the conservatives, I don't see color. I don't see color when it comes to conservatives. But anyways, here we got another history lesson, the left getting owned by history, apparently. And again, I'm nonpartisan. I'm not with the left or the right. I go for issues that make sense for me and my community, no matter who is offering it. So, time is money. Let's go.
All right. Bill Maher has gotten himself in trouble with the left yet again for a monologue he delivered on his show on Sunday. And he's being accused, because of this, what you're about to hear, because of these remarks, he's being accused of white supremacy and actually justifying slavery. Well, let's listen and find out if that is a fair characterization.
Did Columbus commit atrocities? Of course. But people back then were generally atrocious. Everybody who could afford one had a slave, including people of color. The way people talk about slavery these days, you'd think it was a uniquely American thing that we invented in 1619.
You know what you invented? When you guys decided to practice slavery, you created a degeneracy of human rights violations, to say the least. You see, in Africa, I say this and I'll say this again. In Africa, we had the concept of prisoner of war, right? Had the concept of prisoner of war. And Africans didn't do half the things that Europeans did to the enslaved. I mean, with the dehumanization, with the auctions, with the assaults, sexual assault of the women and the men, sometimes the men in front of the women, as a method of buck breaking. Just the whole entire situation, how do I put this, of biracial children coming out of that system, the way that colorism played a part into our community, all these different things have bled out because of European enslavement, but he wants to say it was all the same. Right. I mean, I could even go on to the stripping of the names, destroying lineages in terms of replacing the names with either Christian names or slave master names. A lot of this has bled out to what we see today. There's black people in the United States walking around with their slave names. We'll continue.
But slavery throughout history has been the rule, not the exception. The Sumerians, the Egyptians, the Greeks, Romans, the Arabs, British, the early Americans, all the way up through R. Kelly.
And he throws a dig at R. Kelly, I guess trying to allude to sex slaves. Okay.
The Holy Bible is practically an owner's manual for slaveholders.
Now, this is an important point. See what Bill Maher says here? We're going to put a little pin on this, and we're going to get back to this.
The word slave comes from Slav, because so many Slavic people were enslaved, and they're as white as the Hallmark Channel. Who do you think gathered the slaves from the interior of Africa to sell to slave traders? Africans, who also kept their own slaves.
Well, and that's actually it from Bill Maher, right? So he just throws that in. I think it was cut off early. But again, I've said it many, many times if you've been following along, the firearms. Watch my previous videos to get the full breakdown. But I always say the firearms changed the state of warfare, of invasion. If you look before the introduction of firearms, a lot of conservatives, whether black or white, don't really study that because who knows? Only God knows. But Firearms is an important factor that should not be discounted if you really want to study history properly.
And the whole monologue is quite good. It goes on for about 8 minutes. It's worth listening to. Putting aside the dig at the Bible there, which is silly and not true.
So here we go. So the pen actually came back a lot faster, but he said it was silly and not true. Oh man, he said it was silly and not true. What is he talking about? What is he talking about? Matt Walsh, he said it's silly and untrue. Like, okay, see, let me roll it back. Let me roll it back. See, Matt Walsh, he's a Christian as well too. You know, so he believes in the Bible and religion, you know, a lot like similar to other conservatives as well too. I think it's pretty hard to find a conservative who's not Christian or doesn't believe in Jesus, right? But he said it was silly and untrue. And these conservatives, you see, this is the religious bias, all right? So I'm gonna break it down for Matt Walsh, whether he knows or he doesn't know, right? Let me give him a little lesson. Boom. So Pope Nicholas V and the Portuguese slave trade, enslavement. Let's peruse through here. Let's peruse. See, Pope Nicholas released a papal bull. The papal bull of 1455 justified the expansion of Black African enslavement within early Iberian colonies and the acquisition of more African captives and territory. See? Right here. Right here. So we got the Papa Bull, right? So I'm just laying the foundation. Stay with me now. Stay with me. So we got the Papa Bull. Let's move forward. Right, so this is from the Center for Research Libraries. We're gonna get to who these people are, but let's go a little bit along. See, this source here is pro-Christianity and pro-missionary. So I just want to use them for their sources in terms of timeline, right? So missionary work in Central and Southern Africa began in the early 19th century. 1800s, before Europeans had colonized those regions. Missionaries were among the earliest explorers of Central and Southern Africa. The London Missionary Society sent David Livingstone to South Africa in 1840. 1840 missionaries, right? So let's see who Center for Research Libraries is. Let's just move along. I think there's some more I wanted to mention here. No, that's pretty much it. Okay, so we got a slave ship named Jesus. Did anybody bring Matt Walsh these facts? The good ship Jesus, the beginning of the slave trade, right? You might be looking at me like I'm a little bit crazy. You know, this is a WordPress site. How do we know this is credible? Well, we can't expect the mainstream media to cover something like this. So we got another source here. Talk Africana, Jesus of Lubeck, how Africans were lured into England's first slave ship. So let's just go through. We got Queen Elizabeth with the first voyage of 1562. What else? What else? No, there's a little bit of more information. King Henry VIII. So Jesus of Lubeck, a 700-ton purchase by King Henry VIII. 20 years after its purchase, in disrepair, was lent to Sir John Hawkins by Queen Elizabeth, right? All right. So let's go here. Let's see if we get any of our keywords. Henry VIII, right? So we got 16th century, 1540, right? Let's see, let's see. Later chartered to John Hawkins in 1562 by Queen Elizabeth I. Right, right. So we're getting a little bit hotter, right? Let's just find one more source to verify. Boom, face-to-face Africa. Okay, so let's go through. Let's actually read some of this. Although the English later on became notable African enslavers, the trade has its origins in the bosom of the Portuguese and Spanish. The historical record holds that in 1502, Juan de Cordoba of Seville became the first merchant to send an African enslaved to the New World. Since it was only in its early stages, merchants were allowed by the Spanish authorities to sell only 1 to 3 African slaves. See, look at this. There's a lot of talk about Africans selling Africans, but look at this. How England's first slave trader lured Africans on his Jesus ship and sold them into enslavement. Wow, look at that. Thieving and conniving, right? Let's go through. By 1504, a small group of Africans, likely slaves who were captured from a Portuguese vessel, made their way to the court of King James of Scotland. However, when the English joined the slave trade in 1562, 60 years after the Spanish, they soon scaled the trade in humans with devastating consequences to the Africans. In October of 1562, John Hawkins of Plymouth, 1562, became the first English sailor known to have obtained Africans approximately 300 Sierra Leone for sale in the West Indies. Hawkins traded the slaves illegally with Spanish colonies. Okay, go down a little bit. Go down a little bit. So here, Hawkins sailing to the Gulf of Guinea and venturing into Sierra Leone, captured 300 to 500 slaves, mostly by plundering Portuguese ships. He also used violence and subterfuge, promising Africans free land and riches in the New World. Thieving and conniving. The Africans underestimated the white man and the white man's country. And then look what he turned around and did. And this is what the alt-right wants to say is more clever in conquest, complete barbarianism, thieving and conniving. So we got the first slave ship, Jesus. Now let's move forward. Now let's go to the story of Nat Turner. Here we go. Here we go. I'm doing this thoroughly, right? Nat Turner. We're gonna call Nat Turner Mr. On Site. Mr. On Site, because that's what Nat Turner did. He turned up and he went on site. Let's go. So, Nat Turner, Mr. On Site, was an enslaved man who led a rebellion of enslaved people on August 21st, 1831. Oh, what he did. His action set off a massacre of up to 200 Black people and a new wave of oppressive legislation prohibiting the education, movement, and assembly of enslaved people. So you see what they did here? So they threw in the 200 Black people that suffered as a result of the slave rebellion, but no mention of the white people. So they're trying to put this, even the way the tone of the article is trying to make this seem like Nat Turner did a bad thing here, right? So the rebellion also stiffened pro-enslavement, anti-abolishment convictions that persisted in that region until the American Civil War. So this was a major turnaround. Now, mind you, this wasn't the only slave enslaved rebellion. Mr. Turner, Mr. On Site, he came through. And when you hear about his story, when you really hear about his story, you're going to understand why I'm talking about him. So, Turner was born on the Virginia plantation of Benjamin Turner, who allowed him to be instructed in reading, writing, and religion, aka the Bible. So that's very important. So 3 times in his childhood and hired out to John Travis, 1820s, he became a fiery preacher man, and leader of enslaved Africans on Benjamin Turner's plantation and in his Southampton County neighborhood, claiming that he was chosen by God to lead them from bondage. Now, before we even get to that, he was the plantation preacher. He would read from the Bible to the other enslaved Africans. He was the preacher. He got it a little bit better. He was able to read, write, and he was close to the Bible. The enslaved couldn't read or write. So, in that sense alone, reading and writing, he was privileged in that sense. But all he could read them was the Bible. But then things started to change. Things started to change when he read, because he was limited. This is a very short article, but he was limited in what he could have read, right? So he decided to read some other passages, if I'm not mistaken, and he seen some other verses because the verses he was telling the other enslaved Africans were obedience to slavery, obedience. But then he started reading a little bit more. So believing in signs and hearing divine voices, Mr. Turner, Mr. On Site was like, Lord, give me a sign. Turner was convinced by an eclipse of the sun, 1831, that the time to rise up had come, and he enlisted the help of 4 other enslaved men in the area. So, Mr. On Site, he was turning up. He was turning up, getting ready for the drill, getting ready for the slide. What does the lobby boy say? Don't make me slide. Come with me and one of the guys, right? So an insurrection was planned, aborted, and rescheduled for August 21st, 1831, when he and 6 others killed the Travis family, managed to secure arms and horses, and enlisted about 75 other enslaved people in a disorganized insurrection. They had to throw disorganized because, they got to point out is disorganized. A bunch of slaves that never did anything else but be obedient is now turning up on the slave masters, right? Are disorganized, and that resulted in the murder of an estimated 55 white people. Oh God. Oh God. Even though this seems like a small number, 55, this really set off a chain of events. So they just came through. Y'all need to give it up. We don't give a fuck what your crackers want. The life is mine. The life is mine. Right? Just to get back to being a little bit serious, they cleared the entire block, one whole block. They cleared out the block. Boom, just like that. Just like that. So, I mean, to be 100% real, they got to him, they hanged him. 200 people suspected of being part of the mob. They were either executed, no, was it 56 were executed and 200 others were beaten, right? So, but this set off a chain of events. Boom, the preacher man came through on site. don't make me slide, right? So that's another big story for Mr. Matt Walsh. I hope him and the conservatives tuning in enjoy it. So here's just one last thing before we get back to the main part. We got Bible passages about slavery. So Ephesians 6:5-8, Paul states, slaves, be obedient to your human masters with fear and trembling and sincerity of heart as to Christ, which is Paul instructing slaves to obey their master. Similar statements regarding obedient slaves can be found in Colossians 3:22-24, 1 Timothy 6:1 and 2, and Titus 2:9 and 10. And we have 30 plus powerful Bible verses about slavery. And we got 25 Bible verses about slavery. So, I mean, in context with Nan Turner, these were the verses, the slave Bible, as they called it, that he was spewing. Let's get back here. So I thoroughly went through all of that, right? Let's reel it back. I thoroughly went through all of that just for Buddy over here because it was apparently, what was it, silly and not true, quote unquote. Let's go.
The rest of it, I basically agree with. It's also not true that people back in the earlier times were generally atrocious. It's not like they weren't worse people, but they lived in a different time. They lived in a more brutal time. But generally speaking, the message there, I agree with it. In fact, it might remind you of something. It might remind you of a monologue that I delivered on this show very recently. You know, it's very similar. Now, I'm not accusing Bill Maher of listening to my show. I would never accuse anybody of that. But we have had a similar conversation, and I'm glad that Maher's talking about it.
So he's trying to take some low-key credit at the same time bigging his bro up. So he's trying to take some low-key credit here. Very, very classy, very classy.
It's important because it helps us to actually understand historical events when we put them in context. Right? You can't understand anything about history until you understand the context.
I agree with you 100%. 100%. Wow, that's crazy. I agree with him. He's talking about context. Yo, let's go.
Of the people that, you know, the context that people lived in back in those days. It's funny, in fact, that the left cares deeply about context when we're discussing, say, the brutality of modern day criminals, non-white criminals anyway.
So he's going in a different direction, but I'm not part of the left, but I love context. So I know he's in and they're in like they call it the culture war, the right and the left, liberal, conservative. I'm not part of that. That does not belong to me. The liberals, I will drill on the liberals as well too. I actually have a few videos that I'm thinking about that I'm gonna put out, but like I do not agree with white liberals. Malcolm X warned the black community about white liberals. So I'm not part of the left, not part of the right. Right. So let's go.
So if we see another one of those videos of someone who's out on bail and has a lengthy rap sheet, just randomly brutalizing someone, or there was one recently of someone robbing a convenience store and putting the cashier on his knees and then executing him, shooting him in the back of the head. Of course, that person, lengthy rap sheet, criminal. I think that person was out on bail, I believe. Many videos like that. Whenever we see these videos, what we hear from the left is that, well, we have to understand the context. We have to understand the systemic racism and all the things that they've suffered in their community. We have to understand that.
Right. So he's using, so basically this is a tactic, I will say, that they've been using more frequently and more often, is just throwing back whatever the left says right back at them to make their arguments. So this entire culture war, it's very interesting. It's very interesting to say the least. But he's just throwing it back at them, talking about context. We'll just go a little bit further.
And the context becomes an excuse that lets the criminals off the hook and back into the community to victimize even more people. But then somehow they're totally uninterested in analyzing the context for anyone who lived on Earth prior to the modern age. So people that are living today, some people anyway, get the benefit of context, but nobody who lived before us gets the same grace.
No, I do context all the way around, and I'm here to help you with that.
They're all expected to just know better. But with that attitude, you can never understand history. And if you refuse to understand history, then studying it is pointless and impossible.
Wow, this guy is just basically saying the same things I say. That's amazing. That's amazing. Let's see where he goes.
There's another reason why this matters also. It's that it can give us an opportunity to analyze ourselves. Like the fact that everyone in the world supported slavery for thousands of years, that almost no one voiced any objection to the practice in principle. Now, there were people who objected to certain elements of the practice and objected when it was particularly brutal, but as far as someone saying slavery itself is wrong, human beings are all equal, like that sort of thing, there was almost no one making that claim for thousands of years of human history across the entire world.
Now, okay, this is more than enough. I could really go through. I mean, between with the Bible thing and then the Bill Maher, now he's just going on, and he said he loves context. I see what he's doing now. I see what he's doing, but he's doing, man, let me gather my thoughts. Let me gather my thoughts here, right? Let me gather my thoughts. So just 2 points, very easy, right? So firstly, he's talking about context, and that's the context of slavery. Enslavement in Africa is what is trying to be explained, right, to these people, and they're failing to really grasp what is being said in terms of the concept of prisoner of war, the barbarianism, the mistreatment, the human rights violations of Africans, and the followed policies, legislation, decades of mistreatment, sabotage, physical violence, intimidation. I could go on and on and on. And that has leaked into modern society today. So that is the context. If you don't understand the context, if you want to believe all slavery was the same, if you want to believe Europeans, they just did it better and they were barbaric in nature, I guess, I guess if you want to defend capitalism, sure. So the second point where he says nobody in history objected, and then he refers to the abolitionists in history, probably the white ones, probably referring to the British, because the British love saying, "Oh, we stopped it," and then behind Canada's there too. "Oh, we stopped it," right? What about all the slave rebellions, the resistance going on the continent? Technically, that would be the first resistance to enslavement. That would be the first resistance. And I'm not talking about just for their own tribe. Talking about across the board. Some tribes outlawed enslavement across the board. Sure, I know they're gonna go in like, Africans sold other Africans, but that didn't go on throughout the continent, right? So, I mean, it's like I said, we go back. I mean, this is not exclusive to just the black conservatives, because the black conservatives have been watching the white conservatives. They're like, okay, so they've taken their lead, cherry picked the facts, and discard everything else that doesn't fit with the narrative, right? So he gets to say in a platform of 1.7 million that nobody in history stopped slavery except for, you guess it, white people. So that's it. I had to thoroughly take him down on the whole Bible Christian thing. I mean, it's either disingenuous or it's really just sad he doesn't know this. But if he did know this, would he care? Probably continue to be disingenuous. I really don't know. I really can't say whether or not they know this information, but they're blatantly wrong. I'm here to check them. So it is what it is. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about what is your favorite part. All right. Peace out.